Welcome, everybody, to our session after the break right now. And it's my honor to welcome our first speaker, Michael Nevradakis, who is from Deree, the American college in Greece. And his paper today, his talk, is entitled Constructive Journalism in Greece, Weathering Many Storms. So, Michael, welcome.
So Christian, Dagmar, thank you very much. And Christian and I also share from apparently the same alma mater,
Yes.
the Department of Radio, Television, Film at the University of Texas at Austin. Great experience there. So thanks for having me. Let me just share a couple of words about who I am first. My day job is in academia. I've been teaching at the American College of Greece since 2018, the year that I completed my PhD. But in addition to my academic work, for the past 2 years, I have been involved with a very interesting startup in Greece that is the subject of my presentation today. It's called Orthos Logos, which in English translates as roughly as rational discourse. And it is Greece's first startup and actually first outlet of any kind that focuses on what is known as constructive journalism, or alternately solutions journalism. So we launched in April of 2019 with our first issue then. I've been a member of their team from before that, however, and helped to get the startup up and running. And we came into what is a very crowded media market in Greece, actually a very overcrowded media market, one can say, in all aspects. There's numerous, almost countless, it seems, broadcast and traditional media outlets, newspapers, magazines, and there's a lot of online news portals. Where we differentiate ourselves in this landscape is by providing something that we think no one else is providing in Greece, which is an emphasis not just on negativity, crisis, scandal, etc., but also on solutions and on news that focuses not just on the negative, but also on the positive as well. And that is really rather rare in Greece, where the news media tends to be very sensationalistic and often has a very strong negativity bias. And I'll talk more about that with some data later. So we're entirely online. We don't have a newsroom per se, but we do have a team of about 10 to 12 writers. And we occasionally do meet as well, or were meeting until fairly recently. And we've adopted something else that's relatively unique in Greece, which is a crowdfunding / subscription model. Because we have no advertisers, we want to be completely independent of any commercial interests. So we're relying on our subscribers to sustain our work. And it's been a little bit of a difficult ride even before the pandemic. I'll talk more about that, but this is something that is relatively unusual for Greece, this sort of model. So we're in relatively uncharted waters as far as any sort of journalistic operation in Greece is concerned. There's probably only a couple of other outlets that I can think of offhand that are doing something similar. So between April 2019 and the start of this year, we had a slow but steady growth in terms of our number of subscribers. What was notable, however, was in a sense the quality of our subscribers. We had a lot of opinion leaders, a lot of people from the academic world, a lot of people from the world of politics and so forth that were paying a subscription to read our content, and also a fair amount of Greeks that are living overseas in other countries as well. That in and of itself is notable because our content as of now is produced only in the Greek language. We'd love to eventually move toward also having an English edition, but we're not there yet. So our content is just in Greek. And nevertheless, we do have a fair amount of subscribers that come to us from outside of Greece. Greeks that live overseas are not always comfortable speaking and reading the Greek language, but in this case, we seem to have found some subscribers overseas that are very comfortable with actually long-form journalism in the Greek language. So that was how things were going up until February or March of this year. Obviously, then the pandemic came along, and it created an interesting set of challenges for us in a sense that we didn't have a wide audience to rely upon. We just had this group of subscribers that were reading our content, and we were still very much in a phase of our operations where we wanted to grow our subscription base. And the pandemic and the measures that were enacted in Greece, including a rather strict lockdown the first time around and also now a second time around, curtailed a lot of economic activity in the country. And that, of course, has had its impacts on our ability to attract the same level of new subscribers that we were getting up until the start of this year. But there were other difficulties that we had to overcome and that we're still really overcoming as well. Before I get into the specifics about what we've done during the pandemic period, one being that there's a lot of mistrust in Greece in the news media in general. For instance, about a week ago, the new Reuters Institute digital news report came out for this year from Oxford University. In that report, Greece ranks 32nd out of 40 countries in overall trust toward the news media. And Greece has consistently been low in these rankings, no matter who has done the polling for the past several years at least. There's actually a saying that is still very commonly heard in Greece, and this one actually goes back decades and decades. It's not as catchy. It kind of rhymes in Greek. It doesn't really rhyme in English, but it kind of calls journalists essentially bums and snitches. Like the language is really very, very blunt in that regard. According to this year's Reuters Institute report, the overall level of trust in the Greek media, in Greek news content, is 28%. So only 28% of Greeks say that they trust the news, and actually only 30% said that they trust the news that they use. So even the preferred outlets that Greek people tend to read and to rely on to get some news, they don't even really trust those outlets either. So they read everything with a whole lot of skepticism. And I've encountered that personally. I can say if I tell someone in Greece that I've just met, let's say that one of the things that I do is journalism, you kind of, get a sense that they're thinking, oh, you're one of those people, that lies about everything. So that's a difficult mentality to overcome. And especially when also trying to explain to people that we're not only trying to do journalism differently from what most others are doing in Greece, but also with a different business model where we're actually asking you to subscribe, even if it's not a lot of money. It only comes out to about €5 or €6 a month. It's still something that, there's a lot of barriers that need to be overcome as far as our relationship with the public. And that point relates to my next point, which is that Greece doesn't really have a subscription culture in general. Not just in terms of the news, but in terms of the media more broadly. For instance, even like pay television, subscription television was rather late to take off in Greece compared to a lot of other countries. Newspapers never really operated on a subscription model. So asking someone to pay a monthly subscription fee to read news and journalism in Greece is a bit of a tall order. And I do have some statistics for that I'll mention later when I come back to that point. But there's also just a high degree of polarization in Greece that's been true for quite a long while, and it's along political grounds, it's along social grounds. There's a lot of social cleavages in the country that go back decades. And it's just something else that is reflective of the overall mentality in a country that we need to overcome. So we were already operating with those challenges. The pandemic brought us one additional challenge, or one additional set of challenges. There were, in some ways we were well suited to adjust. We were already operating mostly virtually, other than maybe an editorial meeting in person once a month or so. So in that sense, we were able to make the adjustment, but we saw that there were going to be challenges as far as attracting new subscribers at a time where people were feeling very uncertain economically, and when economic activity in the country had mostly ceased. So what we decided to do was to think a little bit outside the box and to sort of endure a little bit of additional short-term pain with the goal of building a long-term audience and a long-term relationship with our audience. So one of the things we decided to do was to offer our first, I believe, 2 or 3 issues once the pandemic began. So March, April, and May, I believe, as free issues. So we temporarily put aside our subscription model. And for those people who were subscribers, we gave those subscribers those months as extra months in their subscription. So they didn't end up actually losing anything. And this was a way to open up our journalism to a larger audience that was looking for news during this period, and that at the same time was feeling sort of the pinch economically. So we made our content freely available during that period. We also, during that period, decided to offer individuals, for instance, that we interviewed for stories and so forth, and some of them are fairly prominent individuals, we offered them free subscriptions in the hopes that they would then take the stories that we published and the interviews that we published with them, and not just spread them around to people that they knew, but also to spread the word out in general about our journalism to other people that they knew as well. So we decided to make all of our content available to them for free as well. And that seems to have gotten us some additional subscribers. And then we decided to really redouble our emphasis on solutions, on finding positives in what was a very obviously troubling and negative period for so many people, and to really focus on the spirit of cooperation, including international cooperation. And actually, one of the things we did was every month we made our issues, we turned our issues in, because we release a new issue every month, sort of like a magazine. Each issue had a theme. So we had the theme one month was something like role of international organizations. We had another theme, polarization in the pandemic. So we had very focused issues, and we really wanted to emphasize something that was wildly different from the sort of like the fear mongering and sensationalism of the Greek mainstream media. And when things really did sort of finally get really squeezed for us, we combined issues. So we did actually for this month and the previous month, we did a November-December combined issue, but with additional content. That's going to be coming out in a few days, actually. And that was essentially our strategy during the pandemic, and it seems to have worked. We've managed to, in this period, maintain and even slightly grow our subscriber base at a time where the expectation was that we would probably lose subscribers. This is in part reflective of the fact that over the past year, the Reuters Institute found that there was actually a 4% increase in the percentage of people that pay for news in Greece, but still the overall percentage in Greece is 11%, so it's still very low. So for us to make any sort of gain during this period is something that we view as a positive as Orthos Logos. At the same time, we see that overall there has been a slight decrease over the past year in the popularity of social media as a source of news in Greece. We view this as a positive. We view this in a sense that people are beginning to get tired of overly sensationalized and sometimes questionable news sources that they find on social media, and this may be indicating a broader turn toward more quality news sources. So we think that this is something that we can benefit from going forward. And this decrease comes after years of increases in the use of social media as a news source in Greece. And one final thing that I'll mention before wrapping up, as part of this investment toward the future, one final thing that we decided to do during the pandemic month, and we're developing it right now, is an internship program for students and recent graduates. And we want to give these students an opportunity to enter the world of journalism at a very difficult time, and to enter the right way. And I can draw upon my experience as a journalism and media professor here by saying that I've had students in recent semesters who were also working in journalism at the same time. And I've heard horror stories where this was their first journalistic job. They would be working for like some online news portal, and they would get paid some like ridiculous small amount of money per month, like 100 euros or something, for essentially full-time work. And it wasn't even real journalism. It was essentially copy and pasting articles from other sources and just other ridiculous things like that. Really not a very enriching or worthwhile experience for them to start out their careers. So we're working on bringing in fresh blood and to bring them into an environment where they can learn how to investigate and do research and present problems and solutions as part of their journalism. So that's our optimistic next step. And we're hoping that all of these things will help us build a foundation toward the future, even if it was a bit of a pinch for us on a short-term basis. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'd love to welcome any of your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. I'd like to remind all the participants watching that you can send us questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. But I do have a couple of questions for Michael myself to begin with. And one of the things is towards the end of your talk, you made note of something that has been noted here in Sweden as well, which is the sort of increased trust actually in recent months in mainstream media. Sweden has very high levels of trust. It's always dangerous to use Sweden as a case study when you're talking about trust because it's always been high. But we have noticed an increase, and that's largely attributed actually to the COVID outbreak, which is that people are increasingly reliant upon information that they can trust since it is now their health that's in question, as opposed to maybe political opinion or sort of ideological debates. And I'm just wondering a little bit, as someone who's involved in a startup, is involved in a smaller news organization, is this something you've noticed as well, that it's not just economic downturn, but also pandemic, somewhat, not ironically, but interestingly, has sort of reintroduced this notion of trustworthiness into the debate in a very, very different way, which also has a knock-on effect in other areas of news?
I think there is a little bit of that happening in Greece. If I look again at the data from the recent Reuters Institute survey, it seems to be indicating at the very least a flattening of the curve, pun intended, in this case, a negative curve in terms of the mainstream media's overall credibility in Greece after years of just continuous decline. I think it may be the case in Greece. This is just an offhand observation of mine that this negativity, which existed in Greece long before the pandemic, but sort of really came to a head during the pandemic, there may be a factor of exhaustion. People have sort of had enough of sort of constantly, being bombarded with with negativity and sort of with news that's kind of meant to scare people. And I think a lot of also what happened was in terms of the mainstream media, there was still a lot of sensationalism, and there still is, no question about that. But I also think that there was much more than in the past an emphasis on speaking to professionals in the field, health experts and people like that. That was not necessarily something you would get from the mainstream media in Greece as much in the past. And that seems to have helped, at the very least, not contribute to a further decline in their overall credibility. So I think that what this is showing is that people are increasingly in Greece looking for better information, more quality information, and not necessarily just the most sensational information.
Right. This actually relates to a second point, which has to do with solutions journalism, which is an interesting concept. I actually have a PhD student here in Stockholm who's writing a dissertation on solutions journalism. And of course, one of the issues there is, what is solutions journalism? Because there's a sort of a de facto assumption that solutions journalism is necessarily good news or positive news, as opposed to critical reporting, which isn't always necessarily a good, what we put in quotation marks, good news. I was wondering, since you talked about it, that's what's the focus, and then you went on to talk about your funding model, just maybe discuss a little bit your idea about the relationship between solutions journalism and your funding model, and the way in which you conceive of solutions journalism and what it is.
Yes, the way that we conceive of solutions journalism is, part of it is that we occasionally do focus on news of a more positive nature. Yeah. But even when we do that, the philosophy that we're really following is news that is based on research, on data, on credible sources, on some degree of investigation, but not necessarily investigation in a traditional investigative journalism sense, where people are just digging around trying to find out about scandals and things of that nature. All of our research is heavily based on research and data, and presenting that in a coherent way in our articles. And what we're trying to do is, and how this relates to our view of what solutions journalism is in many cases we are presenting problems, but we're also presenting potential solutions that have been either proposed for those problems from credible sources. So we could be relying upon, for instance, solutions that have been proposed by economists or by academics, scientists, et cetera, or that have already been implemented and for which we already have some results that we can evaluate and analyze from other parts of the world. And we've done both with various articles that we've published over the past couple of years. So that's really how we primarily view solutions journalism. We don't avoid problems, but we want to show that, for every problem that exists, there's a possible solution or a possible set of solutions. And we've done the research into what those solutions might be. And it's research-based. It's not just us off the top of our heads saying, this is what we'd like to see. Everything sort of is supported by evidence and by research. And that ties into our funding model in the sense that, our selling point is that no one else in Greece is doing this. There's only one other outlet that even sort of approximates the type of journalism that we're doing, and that's it. So we're providing something that is really quite unique in the Greek media context. And we know from personal experience and also from what data has shown over the years that there's a lot of Greeks that, because there's no real quality long form journalism in Greece, or there hasn't been much of it for a long period of time, they actually prefer to read foreign news outlets that provide that sort of journalism. So we're trying to get a little bit of that market to come back to a Greek source by providing journalism that is comparable to what they've been used to reading from overseas.
Mm. And in terms of your, I've got a question here from Jeremy. I'm going to read it out to you. The question is, are you training the journalists in solution journalism beforehand, or rather mentoring them in the practice after they turn in their first drafts, for example?
Well, we haven't started the internship program yet, if that's what the question is specifically referring to. But the idea is that there will be mentoring first. There will be an educational component to it where they will be introduced to the principles of solutions journalism. And one advantage that we have is that on our board, because we operate as a nonprofit, we have a few academics from Greece and from overseas that are working, that are among the most prominent academics in solutions journalism. And they've provided us with a lot of educational materials that we will be providing to these students, so that before they write their first draft, they will have an idea of what the overall philosophy is that we're working with.
And so that the people, the people who are writing right now, who are producing articles at the moment, have they gone through this kind of thing, or is this something that's been going along as the process continues?
They have, actually, and I can even think of my own experience when I was kind of recruited by our publisher. And when he spoke to me for the first time, I had actually not really heard about solutions journalism in any sort of substantial way. So I was given some materials to review that really sort of gave me a much deeper introduction to what solutions journalism is. And the more I was introduced to it, the more that I said, this is really something that kind of matches my own philosophy as to the type of journalism I'd like to practice. And that was sort of like what ended up closing the deal for me to become a member of our team.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we've got a couple of minutes left. Just one quick question. What's the staffing look like at your publication? Because obviously some of these things are kind of labor intensive, long form journalism is intensive. How many people do you have writing, and what's the plan? And just quickly, if you have about 1 minute.
Right now, it's not a very big team. It's about 10 to 12 writers.
Okay.
We have our publisher, who actually does more than just role of publisher. We all kind of do more than what we're actually supposed to do in an ideal sense. 2 or 3 people, including me, have some additional editorial responsibilities and some additional sort of like outreach responsibilities and so forth. But it's actually most of our work is rather evenly distributed. And we're hoping now that with our internship program launching sometime early in the next year, we'll be able to begin to finally grow our team, because it's remained about the same size since the beginning. Okay.
And so, I mean, in terms of, plans for expansion right now, you're staying with that level of people at the moment?
As a core, yes. And then we're hoping that we will sort of supplement it with student interns and recent graduates that will be interns for us.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Michael. Thanks very much for a really interesting talk. It's a really interesting project, and it's going to be fascinating to see actually what happens in the next year or two if you get to pick up, especially with the upturn in trust for media, if there's actually a long-term effect for you. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Sure, thank you.